Welcome back to From My Living Room to Yours. I'm Brenda Soul. I'm the rector at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Encinitas, California. As you may know, I've been featuring stories of resilience over the last few weeks. These are reminders that God is among us and working through us. Today, I thought you'd enjoy hearing from someone who hasn't been around much lately, since he's accepted a call to serve as Vicar of Holy Cross. But he's still working part-time for St. Andrews, so I'm thrilled to share screen time with him today. Richard Hogue, our associate priest, is here to share a story with you.
Yeah, so when Brenda asked me about a story of resilience, I thought I'd be hard pressed, but then a lot of them actually came up, not just around my life, but around a lot of different people. It brought me back to my time in Hoboken, and I was living and working there for All Saints Episcopal Church. And we had a Jubilee Center, which essentially offered after-school programs for kids and other programming for adults as well, in a very impoverished area. So I was working at the church and at the Jubilee Center at the same time when Hurricane Sandy was coming about. So to set the scene a little bit, the year before Hurricane Irene had passed through the area, and it was kind of overblown how much damage that it would do by the media at the time. And so when Sandy was coming, folks weren't preparing as well as they might have otherwise because they thought, oh, well, here comes another overblown natural disaster. When I personally looked at the New York Times website of the picture from satellite view of Irene versus Sandy, it became very clear to me that it was actually going to be quite a big deal. It was nearly 3 times the size just visually in the camera from the satellite. And so I had never been through a hurricane as a Midwesterner before. I'd been through tornadoes, I'd been through those sorts of things, but never a hurricane. So I didn't quite know what to expect. But I went and I got a full tank of diesel for my little Jetta TDI. And I happened to have friends who lived up a 80-foot cliff behind Hoboken, right along the banks of the Hudson River. I knew about the house because I had lived there as an intern for the diocese, and it was attached to another local church. And so I phoned my friends who were still living there, and I said, hey, can I bring up my stuff? Hoboken sits as an island right on the edge of Jersey as the Hudson River moves over to New York. The back end of it had been filled in over time, so it was an especially sinkable area. And I knew this, and I knew I wanted to get out. So I took my stuff up to that house and I moved myself up there. When Sandy actually hit, the videos that were coming in on Twitter and the news were horrifying. I could see the PATH station, which is the subway from New Jersey to New York, filled completely with water. There were sirens blaring. There was just mass chaos. And then a friend of mine called me later that night as the storm went on. And he lived in one of the flood zones. So he calls me and he says, hey, would you be willing to pick me up? My house has been flooded. I grabbed everything I could, threw it in a backpack, and I have my roommate's cat. Would you please come pick me up? And that was horrifying to hear. I knew it would be bad. I knew that the situation would get worse, but I didn't expect it to affect people personally close to me. So I went and I got in my car that night and I was driving along and there were flashes in the sky. And I was like, why are there flashes in the sky? This doesn't make any sense. Turns out it was the junction boxes on electrical poles exploding. And they're so full of electrical power that it looked like lightning flashes all over the place as I drove to a relief center where my friend was staying. I picked him up. We got him back to the house I was staying at, and the roommates there were gracious and let him stay along with me. And we kind of rode out the night that way. We woke up the next morning, and what I remember most clearly was the first sound that I heard, and that was just sirens blaring non-stop. And that continued for days. And a lot of my memories, I don't even remember the sirens anymore because they were just so constant. They were priced into everything I heard at any given moment. And I looked down the cliff into Hoboken, and it looked like Venice. The streets were completely flooded. I decided to go see if I could get to my apartment at all. They were only allowing people in who had IDs labeled as residents of Hoboken. And fortunately, I was one. So I went in and I went and I checked on my apartment. I was fortunate. I lived on the second floor of our building, and the water had just gotten to where our place was. And our furnace was completely flooded. There was no hope of heat outside of electrical heaters. And I decided that clearly I had missed the worst of it, but I went back into the lower sections of Hoboken that were filled in over the years. And there were people in basement apartments who had lost everything. And I remember one man in particular just kind of bringing out what he could and cleaning off the things that he could. And I was super surprised that he wasn't in tears. He wasn't angry at all. He was just happy to find what he had. And it included like a bobblehead of the Giants or something like that, you know, the football team. It was just these little trinkets, but he seemed so happy despite the situation. Everything else was flooded, but he had a few things that kind of were clearly meaningful for him and clearly kept him in a relatively good mood considering the situation. So the resilience I saw was one of heart and emotion in the face of disaster. And it helped me, I think, to learn that actually you can respond in the face of unknowing and uncertainty and of the wake of a disaster. It gave me the power and the gumption to get back to work, actually. And I went back to the Jubilee Center, and we started distributing blankets to folks who were living in Section 8 housing, doing what we could to provide meals as well, and cleaning up the areas that we could. And it was funny because at one point, a few days later, my boss at the time, who I love and respect deeply, who I felt was a bit of a workaholic in his own right, came up to me and said, you know, you should really take a break. Which, you know, was kind of flattering in its own way at that point. But he was right. I did need a break. But the resilience that the people of the town had in the face of this really helped inspire me, somebody who hadn't been through something quite like that ever before. And it's really stuck with me that, in fact, you know, yes, we are limited in what we can do in situations like this, but that doesn't stop the Holy Spirit from working within us. That doesn't stop God from bringing love and light into a situation. And I'll never forget that man with his little tchotchkes, just happily bringing them out, the few things he had in this world that weren't utterly destroyed. It was this beautiful symbol, and it will always stick with me. And that, to me, is what resilience is.
Thank you, Richard. That was wonderful. I'm sure everybody enjoyed that as much as I did. Until next time, may you all experience God's strength and grace in unexpected ways.